We are very excited and proud to have with us this morning Congressman Erik Paulsen. In January of this year, he was sworn in to serve his second term representing Minnesota's 3rd congressional district, which makes up the western suburbs of Minneapolis. Congressman Paulsen is a member of the very important and very powerful House Committee on Ways and Means, which has jurisdiction over health care, economics, and trade policy, and is the chief tax writing committee in the House. He supports pro-growth initiatives and believes that open markets are the key to a strong economy. Erik is also a member of the Free Trade Working Group and the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Working Group. The Free Trade Working Group was formed nearly 20 years ago to educate members and promote policies that would open foreign markets to U.S. goods. He serves as co-chair of the House Medical Technology Caucus and is a leader in advocating for the medical technology industry, the life-saving technologies it provides to patients, and the hundreds of thousands of jobs it supports. Prior to his election to Congress, Erik served in the Minnesota House of Representatives from 1995 to 2008, including 4 years as the Majority Leader. He is a longtime champion of lower taxes, pro-growth economic policies, and the elimination of burdensome and duplicative regulations. Congressman Paulsen believes in the power of small business, their ability to create jobs, drive innovation, and how they are the backbone of the U.S. economy. Erik has 16 years of business experience himself, including working as a business analyst at Target Corporation. He received his BA in mathematics from St. Olaf College and resides in Eden Prairie with his wife, Kelly, and 4 daughters, Cassie, Brianna, Taylor, and Liesel. Erik's commitment to his community does not end with his service in elected office. He has served as a board of trustees of the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, as well as a board member of the Southdale YMCA, the Eden Prairie, A Brighter Day Foundation, and Habitat for Global Learning. When Erik is not in Washington, he enjoys coaching his daughter's soccer teams and teaching Sunday school. So please join me in a very warm Twin West welcome for Congressman Erik Paulsen.
All right, great. All right. Well, it is great to be with you here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And no government shutdown happening in Washington, of course. So it's, some folks were nervous whether I might make it here today, but everything's just fine. I want to compliment the chamber first of all, because Twin West has such strong reputation, is one of the best chambers really not only within the state, but I think just sets the model for what a great chamber can do at the country level, within our whole country. And it's because you've got active membership not only of the business community. You've got your legislators that on a regular basis show up, participate, engage, and have dialogue. You've also got a solid leadership team with, Danette and Mike Lehman, of course. I don't know if Mike's here today, but also Bruce, of course, and Judy Johnson. And so you have a really good team that kind of leads you down the road. And then you have your superintendents in your schools that take the time to come, which is also very, very important to have that interconnectedness with the local community. I thought what I'd do today is just give you a little update on what some of the latest has been happening in Washington from my perspective, because last time when I had a chance to talk to you, I was in as a freshman, in the minority. And of course, things are different now, kind of experiencing a wave election and listening to some of our legislators' experience, or talk a little bit about some of the change that they have gone through as well. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that I'm actually working on as a part of my new committee assignment. I will say this right from the outset. I mean, unlike the previous Congress or the last 2 years, this new Congress, new leadership, and the new members are really dedicated to doing things very differently. And I think you're seeing that already play out in many respects. And it's really about fundamentally changing the way we conduct the people's business out in Washington. And we've got nearly 100 freshmen. Just kind of put that in perspective. And so, when you get elected to Congress, you get this little pin that goes on your lapel, it gets you by the Capitol security and everything. And on the back of the pin is a number. And the number is the rank in your seniority. So out of 435, the back of my pin 2 years ago said 421. So, we were way down the ladder. But after this election, I moved up to 322. I mean, it kind of shows you what a wave election will do. And if you think about it, nearly 100 freshmen, 87 of those freshmen, by the way, are in the Republican conference. I mean, it shows you what a wave election does and what stark change it is. It really does demonstrate that things have to be conducted differently and will be, because the freshman class, as you've seen in the state legislature, tends to coalesce around some different issues and move forward. And we've already made significant changes. I mean, we cut our own budgets by 5% right off the board. We've established new policies where you've got to read the bills, before you can vote on them, which is very nice. Last year, I brought in the 26-pound health care bill, as kind of my little prop. But, having 3 days out there is not only important for the public in today's world to understand what we're voting on and they're conscious of our actions, but also for our members and their staff. I mean, it's truly the most important thing. And people always say process doesn't matter. It's inside baseball. I'm going to tell you, process makes a big difference if you want a good product. And the emphasis now is more on committee work. And I think that's important to point out. I mean, our legislators know that. Committees take the time to dive into the detail, listen to witnesses, hear the testimony, shape and craft legislation better. And the new leadership is committed to doing it that way. And I say that because the old leadership was not. I mean, we had a lot of special favors and backroom deals where big pieces of legislation were pushed through the leadership office. I mean, they were kind of, right or wrong. You can agree with the policy or agree with them, but that's the way it was done. And so on the Ways and Means Committee that I'm on now, and I'll talk about in just a second, being on that committee, we've had more hearings already this year than we had all in the last 2 years. And so I just think when you're going to have a committee process that draws out a lot of the specifics of legislation, you're going to also receive a better product down the road. And also in the debate that took place, we're having a much more open process in debate. As a freshman, there was never once in my 2 years as a freshman where I had the opportunity to experience what's called an open rule, which means you can offer amendments. It was a very closed process. You're only allowed to offer certain amendments. And so that's been changed also. So a very open debate has been taking place. And you saw that play out, I think, a little over a week and a half or 2 weeks ago when we had the discussion about this continuing resolution on spending. And there were like over 600 amendments, about 600 amendments that were offered. And I think we took roll call votes on about 111 of those amendments. 90 hours of debate. Kind of felt like being in the legislature, staying up till 3 or 4 in the morning. But you know what? I mean, both sides that I talked to really appreciated the opportunity. It was partly a pent-up demand, but they appreciated the opportunity to have their idea heard, to have their voice heard, to have the debate, to have the discussion. So, I think that that's absolutely a benefit. And so 111 roll call votes, to put that in perspective, all of last year, we took up 68 votes on amendments. All of last year. And so we did this in just 1 week. And so, yeah, it's going to be a little messy, it's going to be a little chaotic, but, it's democracy, and I think ultimately, again, you're going to get a better product. And I think this sense of change is invigorating. It is really invigorating because we're actually not having a discussion about should we cut government spending. It's actually a discussion bipartisanly about how much should be cut. I think that's a really healthy thing also to be talking about, given our financial situation in the economy right now. And I will tell you this, too. I mean, the rules and the procedures that we have set up right now, and so listen up, Kurt, are more important than any one member or the Speaker of the House even. And I say that because we had a vote, for instance, on a new, it's one of our newer jet fighter planes. And there was a vote for a second engine that would be a part of this fighter plane. And it was, it's built by General Electric. A lot of the plane parts are manufactured in Ohio, which is near the Speaker's district. And you know what? The Speaker said, hey, we're going to let that vote go forward. I guarantee you, if that had been in the previous Speaker's backyard, that vote never would have been allowed to have occurred. And so, and he actually lost the vote. It went right over his head. And, that battle won't be over. It'll continue to go on, for instance, as it gets played out in the Senate and the House. But it does demonstrate, I think, that things are being done differently. So I just think that's refreshing and invigorating. And being on Ways and Means Committee is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to, as a new member, obviously, only in my second term, a relatively young guy to be on there. I'm taking it for every moment it's given me the opportunity to step forward. I'm going to make the most of it. And I say that because, my background's, with business and, math and work in the legislature. And so it's kind of a good fit. But this is also a committee that does have significant importance to actually do things. And it's trade policy, it's tax policy, it's healthcare policy, it's reforming on insurance employment reform. All those provisions have to originate in that committee. It's the only committee that's actually mentioned or referenced in the Constitution. In fact, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee always used to be the majority leader until the chair decided to kind of break it away because he felt that was the more powerful position. And both Bill Frenzel and Jim Ramstad, my predecessors, were on that committee. And I rib them a little bit because I got on that committee a term earlier than they did. And I still have a chance. I had lunch with Jim about a month ago. I see Bill Frenzel about once every 3 months to get their continued advice. So just like my predecessors, I'm going to use this position, and I encourage you, I say use it because I want to get your feedback, to advocate for Minnesota's economy and Minnesota's jobs. And so I'm trying to bring the business experience that I've had, or my real-world experience, as I like to call it, kind of the table. I'm going to also tell you that one of the biggest failures, I think, of the last Congress, and you can always point to, in hindsight, 20's 20, but I think one of the biggest failures was the failure to produce a budget. You know, it was the first time since 1974 that Congress did not actually adopt a budget, which is why we're having that discussion that's playing out in the news right now of continuing resolutions. We're actually funding the fiscal year we're in right now, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. I mean, that's never happened before. So we're literally 5-6 months into the new fiscal year, and we're still deciding how much we should be spending in our current fiscal year. And I think that dereliction of duty really, as most economists would agree, is something that was needed to have a framework to actually set a pattern of certainty for the business community, for instance, to know what we're going to spend on, what we're going to invest in, where the tax code's going to be in terms of establishing certainty. And it's one of the reasons why we're having that debate right now that you're seeing played out. And, you know, the president himself in his State of the Union really came forward and said he wants to make some adjustments and change on spending practice as well. And he wants to freeze domestic discretionary spending, I believe it was, for 5 years. And, you know, like a lot of ideas, I think, that get attention in the State of the Union, you know, sure, it sounds a little warm and fuzzy, and it sounds good. The proposal would actually save about $400 billion over the course of that, it's a 10-year period, actually, over $400 billion. But when you consider that this year's deficit alone is about $1.6 trillion, or that we had a $1.5 trillion deficit last year, or we had a $1.3 trillion deficit the year before that, it really kind of shows how this is just one drop in the bucket of what our debt crisis really is. And so it's kind of like if you are speeding towards a cliff in a car, I mean, you don't just put the car on cruise control. You got to slam on the brakes. And, you know, our legislators obviously are going through similar challenges at the state level. But I just think it's important to point out that we really do have to tackle this issue head on. And there's, you know, I've been a critic of both Republicans and Democrats when they've been in charge of spending, that they weren't fiscally responsible, but we've got to get a control of it, because we've seen over the last 2 years double-digit increases in federal spending, while everyone else in, you know, personal income growth has dropped about 4% since 2007, and everyone else has been clamping down and tightening their belt. And there's absolutely, we got to do the same thing, because 40 cents of every dollar that the federal government spends is borrowed. I mean, that's just clearly not going to be a sustainable pattern. And to put in perspective, you know, people think $1 trillion, $1 billion, not a big deal. I'll just give you a little snapshot of what that means. You know, 1 million seconds, it's about 11.5 days. 1 million seconds. 1 billion seconds, it's a little less than 32 years. 1 trillion seconds, a little less than 32,000 years. So if you wanted to pay $1 every second for 1 trillion seconds, it'd take you almost 32,000 years just to pay $1 trillion. It kind of shows you how challenging it is when you get a $14 trillion debt staring in the face, let alone the deficits we're adding every year. And no one says it's going to be very easy to tackle. You know, we've got to prioritize, obviously. But I'll tell you what, the alternative of not addressing it or not dealing with it is going to be far worse, because we don't want to fall into the trap that some European countries have fallen into, like Great Britain or Greece, for instance, and then basically be forced to impose some painful austerity measures where ultimately you're going to see taxes rise on everybody significantly, as well as seeing benefits cut significantly on the most vulnerable. And, you know, my perspective is, for the most part, I mean, everything we should be doing in Congress right now should be focused on economic growth and job creation, reducing spending, and if it's not, we shouldn't be doing it. I mean, that's kind of my attitude for the most part. But you just can't be about austerity. You can't be about just clamping down budgets and being a bean counter. You also have to be about economic growth. You want to grow the economy. And the irony of the last 2 years is, I think, you know, the business community, many of you, I've had a chance to tour your company. Many of you have been crying out, just like the American public and the Minnesotans have been crying just for jobs, the opportunity, right, to stay employed, to be employed, to move up the ladder. And a lot of the ideas that were coming out of our nation's capital were really counterintuitive to that opportunity. I mean, card check, all right, the health care bill, very controversial. You know, will tax increases happen? Will they not? You know, and finally, you know, right before the buzzer, December 31st, you know, it kind of gets figured out. But in other words, there's no pattern of certainty. And I just really think that we've got to have a opportunity now to kind of focus more on just promoting innovation, hard work, achievement, production, and growing the economy by rewarding the dreamers, by rewarding the risk takers, by really encouraging our greatest export, which is that entrepreneurial spirit. You don't hear the talk in Europe about entrepreneurialism. It's something that's very unique to the United States, and we want to keep that here. We've got to keep it here. And I think Congress needs to give employers the green light. We need to give you the green light to let you know that we respect, we value your contributions. We need investors and entrepreneurs right off the sidelines. We need them engaged by lifting their burdens, not actually creating more. And I think one of the best ways to do that is actually the conversation about tax reform right now, so you can add more predictability into the tax code. We'll be looking at that on Ways and Means Committee, for instance, to really get entrepreneurs to be thinking about how can they deploy capital, how can they allocate capital, how can they invest in businesses and operations and expansion. And the good news is I think that appetite for tax reform is all around bipartisan. Because truthfully, I mean, tax reform cannot be a partisan issue, nor should it be. And the president, again, outlined some proposals in his State of the Union and was more centered around corporate tax reform, which I think is great. That's something that hasn't happened in a quarter of a century. You think about 1986 was the last time we had major tax reform at the federal level. So what was going on in 86? I think Huey Lewis and the News were burning up the charts, right? I mean, that was a long time ago. Top Gun was the big movie. So it's been a while. It takes a long time to kind of move that ball forward. Treasury Secretary Geithner also has had private meetings with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which is a good signal to say that they're seriously interested in actual corporate tax reform. He wants to get our corporate tax rates down to on par with some of our foreign trading partners. Because right now the United States is the second highest in the world for our corporate tax rate, but we are going to be number one in just a couple of months because Japan actually just lowered their rate. So we're kind of sticking out like a sore thumb. And it'd be nice to be able to lower that. So that's the discussion that's going to be going on with the administration. I just also think it's really important, though, in all the discussions about corporate tax reform, we got to make sure we don't leave small businesses on the sidelines. Because a lot of small businesses, as you know, you pay under the individual rate. You might be a sole proprietorship, you might be a partnership, you might be an S corporation, and that's where most of the jobs actually come from, are through those entities, those pass-through entities. And so all the discussion that's been going on so far about corporate tax reform, I want to make sure it doesn't happen at the expense of those smaller employers, for instance. And it's not just taxes, of course. He talked about some of the regulations you've been addressing at the state level, which is really smart. That's also a threat. It is a threat to the economy. Many of them are overbearing and unnecessary. I can give you a couple of ones that are kind of funny to talk about, but they're real. Earlier this year, the EPA finalized a rule that subjects dairy farmers to the Spill Prevention, Control, and Countermeasures Program, which was created in the 1970s to address oil spills, right, like the BP oil spill that happened recently. Well, the EPA, in its wisdom, decided to move forward, and this would also cover non-petroleum fuels, including anything with even a small percentage of animal fat in it, like milk. And so dairy farmers are now required and have to prepare like an emergency management plan, building containment facilities, and training first responders in case of like a milk spill. I mean, really, you can't make this stuff up. And these plans have to be in place by November of this year, and the Department of Agriculture is spending like $3 million on this. I mean, it's crazy. And, there's also a new one that's come out recently that's getting a little fodder, but it's, you treat milk like an organic compound like it's a pollutant, but also there's a new rule that is coming out to regulate coarse particulate matter, which is also known as dust. So there's a proposal to regulate fugitive dust, which is basically blowing around from farm to farm. So if you get on the highway on 12, right, you go west. In the summer, dust is blowing across farmland, and the agencies are worried about that and what the pollutants are going to be as a part of that. But you can joke about some of these things. They have an economic impact, obviously, on folks that they apply to, and they also cost money when the government regulates them. And one I'm going to give you in all sincere seriousness that I'm really concerned about as a part of my co-chair of the Medical Technology Caucus I've learned about is what the FDA is going through and promoting or pushing forward on our medical device companies. And again, these are companies, it's not just Boston Scientific and Medtronic that we know those names, right? There are so many of these small companies that I get to tour that have 5 employees, 10 employees, they're not yet profitable, they're working their tails off on these life-saving technologies with innovation. And the FDA is making it really troublesome to actually bring their products to market. In fact, you can bring a product to market 2 years quicker than you can in the United States now, just to get approval on the device. And part of the problem is you've got an FDA, I think, that's been a little mismanaged, where when clinical trials are going on and the procedures are going forward with the company, that 40% of the staff on a regular basis is turning over within the folks that are kind of monitoring the approval process. So the company's got to kind of start over and go back to square one. Well, that costs money. And so the people that are providing the venture capital or the startup funds to promote these new ideas are kind of pulling back. And so once you shut that pipeline off, you can't just turn it back on. And a lot of the R&D has the potential to move over to Europe, and that is really of a concern. And it won't just be Europe, I guarantee you. It'll be Brazil, it'll be China, as those countries emerge and become stronger down the road. And there's huge amounts of these regulations that cost over $100 million a year, and those are the ones I'd like to focus on. I'd rather see Congress be like a board of directors and have to approve or finalize anything with a major economic impact of over $100 billion. I think that would slow down some of the proposals. I think that would have a good reaction. And good news, we actually passed yesterday in the House the repeal of this 1099 tax repeal, a tax reporting requirement. I mean, that is absolutely something that, no one will own up to the ownership of how that got put into the health care law. Nobody. Nobody knows where it came from, who inserted it, and how it got in there. No one will admit to it. But I'll tell you what, I mean, nearly every company I visited says it is crazy. If you are going to do business with somebody and you walk into a Target store and you buy $600 of office supplies, you're going to be required to fill out a 1099, send it to Target, and also to the IRS. I mean, it's just crazy. And that's the paperwork burden that's kind of looming over the heads of everybody. So hopefully that'll come to a solution down the road. And finally, I just want to mention this too. The future of economic growth doesn't only rely on reducing regulations or reducing taxes, but it's also about opportunity. It's about opportunity to expand in other markets, in emerging markets that are really hungry for a lot of our products, especially in medical technology, for instance. And as a member of the South Korea Free Trade Group and the Free Trade Working Group, I'm going to tell you it's a bipartisan effort. We had a meeting 2 days ago with Ambassador Kirk, and we've really done our part to work with the administration to send a signal. And I think the South Korea Free Trade Agreement is probably going to move forward to the Congress probably within a month. And it's kind of been on the sidelines for 2 years. And in the meantime, every other country, and in Europe in particular, they've been negotiating these deals. And if those deals happen before we get in there, I mean, we're going to continue to lose our opportunity, and our market share is going to get cut out. And I'll tell you that it was interesting because there were the Democrats that were in our meeting with the free trade, because it's mostly Republicans that are more advocates or hawks of promoting trade agreements. The Democrats were pretty passionate. They were passionate about the jobs portion. And they were really pushing the ambassador to not only do South Korea, but to think about doing Panama and Colombia and not let those linger for another year. Because if you let them linger for another year, it's going to get caught up in some of their sort of politics, and it won't actually happen. And so I think that is also a real opportunity. And finally, 2 pieces of legislation that I'm working hard on that I get an opportunity to do not only with the Ways and Means Committee and the Medical Technology Caucus, but also, when you're in the majority, you get to kind of push some pieces of legislation. I'll take some questions quick. But number 1, repealing the medical device tax, which is set to take place in about a year. 2.3% sales tax on all devices. It doesn't matter if you're profitable or not. It's going to end up being a cost that gets passed on to the consumer, unfortunately. I think it's a big mistake. We got over 100 co-sponsors right now. It's bipartisan. I'm really hoping to make the point. If you want to keep a Minnesota success story alive, you want to keep an American success story alive, you really work on keeping this industry here. And you don't want to shut that off. And then secondly, many of you use HSAs or FSAs, right? These spending accounts that is your money. You've planned with your employees on how to use those, how to have them use that resource from a consumer-driven healthcare model. A lot of restrictions were put in place as a part of the new healthcare law, including caps that lower what can be contributed to them. And there's one provision in particular that I'm actually chief authoring to move forward, and that's this new restriction to repeal that does not allow you to use those accounts to purchase over-the-counter medication. For instance, allergy medications, flu medications, whatever that might be. So a lot of parents that are finding out about this now are really upset because no longer can they just use their own money for those purchases. They have to get a doctor's prescription or permission. So now you've got more doctor's visits happening, more call-ins happening. Again, it's increasing the cost, increasing the visits. The doctors don't like it. It's more paperwork for them. It's more work out of the office. And so it's going totally in the wrong direction. And so we're trying to get the consumer groups, and they are really strong advocates, to kind of work together to point out this is really a flawed piece as well in the part of the new health care law. So it's not without its challenges on all these big issues. I just really appreciate your opportunity, the opportunity to hear directly from you on a regular basis, to tour your companies and Twin West's involvement in the community. I want to tell you, too, I mean, when I look at the economic recovery, the need for it, I see it right here. I mean, it is in this room. And if we can just make sure that we're out of the way so we can keep you unleashed to do what you do best, to take risks, to invest, to grow jobs, we will all be much better off. And I also want to thank you for the privilege of being able to represent you. It's a very humbling opportunity. And coming from a household with 4 daughters and, all women in my family, it's kind of nice to get out to Washington, but it's hard. It's hard to be away, when you go home and the kids are in school and that sort of thing. But I'm committed to do it because I work hard, and I'll always have an open ear, don't always have all the answers. And just like many of our legislators here, really want to make sure we keep Minnesota a great place to work and live and raise a family. Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Am I on? Okay. Oh, there. Sorry about that. I think if somebody, we've got time for maybe 1, maybe 2. If somebody has a burning question, Ed, your hand went up quick. So, can you project?
Ed can project.
Eric, both the local and national governments have big problems, budgetary. One of the solutions would be to get rid of some deductions or all deductions to the tax. And that has a lot of benefits. It simplifies it for the taxpayer. It would add revenues to get rid of deficits. Is it the special interests that are keeping deductions, getting rid of deductions as an issue?
Well, good question. First of all, I wouldn't say it's special interests that are keeping those deductions in place. You have to understand, over the course of time, a lot of deductions have been in place, whether it's charitable deductions, whether it's the mortgage interest deduction, and there's also other things that always creep up, right, as it applies to one industry or one small business, the research and development tax credit, for instance. I mean, I met recently with the CFOs of some really large corporations that are interested in having a lower corporate tax rate. And I asked them, I said, okay, well, you've got a system right now that encourages you essentially to borrow, because there are benefits to them to borrow, rather than, it's more debt-driven than equity-driven. And their answer was, you know what, we are willing to start with a blank sheet of paper to know we have to be competitive. I mean, we want to be able to grow jobs in the United States, because a lot of their growth is in other countries. But because of our tax laws, they can't even bring the money back here to the United States, or they get taxed twice. And we're one of the only countries that does that, so we're killing ourselves. And their preference is, hey, we're willing to start with a blank sheet of paper. I think that's smart. That's the way it's got to go. So from my perspective, everything's kind of got to be on the table. And it's really setting the stage over the next 2 years of really putting forward what fundamental tax reform could be. How do you broaden the base? How do you flatten it out to at least make ourselves not only competitive, but make it simpler, make it fair? And, you know, it's not just the tax side, too. I mean, spending is going to have to be tackled on some very large issues, right? I mean, entitlement programs, et cetera. And it's a little bit like this sort of Sven and Ole joke, if you think about it. You know, where Sven and Ole are up in the North Woods up in Minnesota, and Sven comes out to the outhouse and he sees Ole there. He's just pulling up his pants, finishing up his business, and he sees Ole take a $20 bill out of his pocket and throw it down the hole. And Sven looks at him and goes, Ole, you just threw $20 down the hole. What'd you do that for? And Ole says, well, when I was pulling up my pants, I dropped a quarter down there. You didn't think I was going down there for 25 cents, did you? You know, I just say that because I think all of us are going to have to figure out how we're going to kind of get into the muck of, you know, the big stuff, right? How are you going to get into the big stuff? How are you going to get into the big conversation of some of the larger issues that drive spending, you know? And so that's kind of the part of it. Yeah.
Do you have time for one?
Yep, go ahead. Yeah.
One quick question.
Sure.
So it can't
We
be
got
how
time.
we're going to balance this federal budget. Anyone? Okay, well, I know your time is short, so I thank you so much for being
Great to be
here,
here.
Congressman
All
Paulsen.
right.
Thank you. Okay, so just a couple more things, but really, Congressman Paulsen, taking the time to join us here today is so meaningful to us because we know how busy you are. We were so happy that Senator Harry Reid chose to accept the House bill, not make any changes, because you wouldn't be here with us today if he did. But also just for your leadership in representing our community and Minnesota. So thank you again. Thank you very much. All right, and also I'd like to thank all of our legislators for being here today. That really makes this program very special for us. I did want to also recognize that Commissioner Mark Stenglein was here. He skipped out, so if you see him, somebody tell him I did recognize him from the podium. I wanted to do that. It's great to have our commissioners here as well. And also just a couple things. Please save the date to Friday, April 8th for our next legislative breakfast. So we will be back on schedule the second Friday of every month.